Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Yeah, really lovely to be here. I've spent the last sort of 2 decades across the tech and financial services industries in London, but also in San Francisco, Stockholm, and Singapore. Most recently, I was director of operations at Deliveroo, managing several global teams, including strategy, marketing, communications, value proposition. I'm currently an angel investor. So yeah, happy to kick off and dive into, whatever areas are most helpful in greater detail.
Right. So I think for most founders at the pre-seed stage, like we're used to talking about early sales and like customer experience, but kind of at what point do founders start thinking about customer ops? And also, like, let's just start out too by defining customer ops and like everything that falls in that category.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think when it comes to operations, that can mean many different things in many different businesses. So I think it is about taking quite an individual look at our businesses and whether it's a B2B or a B2C business, identifying which areas fall under perhaps sort of sales or marketing team or a finance team, and looking at the sort of expertise that you've got around the table, whether that's your co-founders or your founding team or early hires, and defining what makes sense to sit under operations. Just to sort of give you a sense, I think across like the different businesses I've been in, at Deliveroo operations, well, the chief operating officer oversaw both the sort of general managers of all the different regions. So that there were 12 regions or countries that Deliveroo operated in. So the operations team included all of the general managers, but also included two of the three sides of the three-sided marketplace. So the three sides were the restaurants, the riders, and the consumers, and both restaurants and riders fell under operations. So that just gives you a flavor of what it was like at Deliveroo, but of course that's a much later stage business. In the early days, it might be everything from like finance and HR to if there's any physical product, then the sort of physical logistics and things like that. But as I mentioned, in my instance, I was also managing strategy and marketing.
What are the usual like deliverables or KPIs attached to a customer ops like department?
I guess it's hard to give a generic answer here. I think, again, it really depends on the business. But, if you're a consumer-facing business, or rather, B2C business, I think all of the different, firstly, you'd want to understand the entire value chain of how the customers are interacting with your business and really track data across that entire value chain. So, everything from like awareness and like are customers aware of your brand? How many of them are arriving on your landing pages? How many of them are then converting and clicking through? So it's sort of very superficial metrics, such as like click-through rates and things like that. But then you also want to keep track of not just how many of them then convert into customers through their journey with the brand, but also, perhaps how long it takes them to complete a purchase or complete a transaction, how many of them are recurring customers, and if you have an opportunity to introduce any sort of referral program, what percentages of customers are referring their like friends and family. And then, of course, you want to keep track, once like the transaction is done, you also want to keep track of what are the the sort of NPS or like any sort of metrics that you can try and pin down the experience of the customer. And so these can be really important sort of when it comes to the customer facing interactions. And then when it comes to internal sort of underlying, sort of operations that enable all of that, I think it's everything from like commercial, like looking at how much money you're spending on customer acquisition, how much money you're spending on different parts of that journey, as well as how you're allocating your budget and like which parts of that you're able to articulate returns on that investment versus others where it's less clear.
No small task. That's a lot that's in there. What are the typical pitfalls that you have found startups fall into within this category, but also at Deliveroo, what were like the largest challenges that you faced there?
Sorry, Margaret, do you mind clarifying the question? Pitfalls in terms of
like what are the biggest mistakes founders make when it comes to customer ops?
So maybe I can actually share a sort of an experience that we'd had when I was at Photobox Group, which was a private equity backed group of brands creating cards and gifts across Europe. And in the UK, they had brands like Photobox and Moonpig. One of the sort of, one of the data points that we found was that when you looked at the quantity of time that each customer took to complete one of the products, so it was a photo book, which meant that essentially a customer would select a photo album and then they would upload photos, customize it, and then like complete the purchase and complete the transaction and then send it to print, and they would then receive it in the mail. One of the things that we found was that on average, it took 2 weeks for customers to complete that transaction or that purchase. And so we had a sort of hypothesis internally that, okay, that seems really long. Maybe what we could do is if we were able to shorten that for the customer, then and automate it and just make it really, really quick and easy, maybe we would be able to get customers to complete their transactions at a higher rate. So you have a higher sort of conversion rate on your customers, incoming customers. But also, if we're able to make it simpler and faster, maybe customers will be returning at a higher frequency. So these were the hypotheses, and we went about trying to test this by bringing in behavioral economists and psychologists and really taking them through the customer journey. And what we found at the end of that process was that, in fact, a lot of customers valued the time that they were putting into customizing the product because they were coming to our brands during large milestones in their life, whether it was birthdays or anniversaries or weddings or things like that. So we'd actually almost completely missed the point in that, what the customers valued was something very different from what we valued from a commercial lens and from a sort of corporate lens. And so that was a really important learning, and it really changed how we defined our roadmaps. And at the time we were working on something called emotionally intelligent AI, so really trying to identify the parts of the process that could be made simpler and more efficient and more effective, but we really tried to make sure that it was done in a much more sensitive way to the client's needs. So one example of that is when customers are uploading, say, 100 photos, one of the things that they struggle with is like duplicates or cropping and things like that. And when you're removing duplicates, customers have a very different view of how they feel about like 20 photos of a 6-month-old versus 20 photos of a group of adults. And so that was one example of like really being conscious, not just of like the process and what you're doing to automate, but also like that situational awareness of when are some of these actions important and relevant and necessary. And so I think one of the kind of takeaways that I'd share from that experience is I think we often think that we know what customers want, and I think what becomes incredibly important, as we're iterating our business model and as we're growing our businesses, is really to test these hypotheses and test quickly. So at Deliveroo, for example, one of the projects that my team worked on was looking at one of the landing pages that had been built across like all 12 markets. And we had lots of hypotheses about, oh, actually, like maybe if we, change the placement of certain components of the landing page, or if we move certain things to the second and third pages, like that might change conversion rates. We ended up conducting 94 experiments over a sort of 10 to 12 month period across 12 markets, and we increased conversion rate by 78% in the UK and 50% globally. So it ended up being really, really successful, but I think we could never have predicted like a lot of the results that we saw through experimentation. So I would say the first thing is really about being quite rigorous about testing our hypotheses, and I think not assuming that we know what our customers want, no matter how well we think we know our customers. I think the second thing is also sort of one of the things that I have found to be really, really helpful is taking a sort of end-to-end life cycle approach to the business. So really looking at how customers flow through basically the customer journey, but then creating a matrix where you're then looking at what are all the different functions in my business and how are they supporting each of those areas. And I think this is a really helpful exercise to do, whether it's once a year or every 6 months, because it really helps to like draw your attention to where am I allocating my resources, like where am I putting most of my energy, most of my time, money, people. But also like some of these things can change quite quickly over time, particularly in the early stages of the business. So I think it also helps you articulate where you want to be changing some of those decisions. And thirdly, I think in a world where there's limited resources and always so much more that can be done than we often have time or ability to do, it makes it really, really clear who's responsible for which parts of the customer journey. And that also means that you then don't have 3 or 4, 5 people working on the exact same things in different ways, and just makes you much more, I think, efficient and aligned in that perspective. And I guess just finally, not to sort of, preach to the choir, but I'm sure we're all very up to date on, KPIs and objectives, and that it's just really important to gather data where we can and to keep an eye on data. But I think what becomes increasingly important in sort of in our businesses is not so much a lack of data, but sometimes too much data. And we sometimes, often fell into this trap at Deliveroo where we would just have 400 metrics. And, of course, like you cannot optimize all 400 metrics. So it becomes really, really important to be very clear, like for whatever the period of time is, what that North Star is, what is that one metric or 2 metrics that are like the sort of the absolute must-dos for our business, so that all the teams are sort of oriented towards working on those things. And again, that can change over time, but at least for whether it's a quarter or whether it's a half a year or for a year, like to be really, really clear what that like North Star is.
My God, you mentioned so much good stuff in there. To go back at the start of what you're saying, I know you mentioned that you brought in third-party individuals to help map out that customer journey and understand what was particularly valuable for your customers. For founders who are usually the ones speaking to the customers themselves, what are the sort of questions that you found to have been most useful that also don't like lead the users into saying something and then you kind of like miss what's really valuable over here?
Yeah, Margaret, that's such a good question. And to be honest, I think there's certainly much more of a science to that than I'm an expert in. But what what I've found to be true, both at Deliveroo and Photobox and other businesses, is that I think that you're gathering both qualitative and quantitative data. So firstly, like, as like where you can, like using stats that you have from your platform on, how customers are moving through the customer journey, where they're dropping off, and things like that. And then secondly, it could be observational, where where you invite a customer into your office and you just have them kind of go through the website, and then you're just sort of observing them and seeing like where they struggle or where they're spending a lot of time. There is some technology on this front, like where, and I'm struggling to remember the name, but can always share it later, where you can track like where the customers like mouse are lingering. Don't know if you'd call it mice, but basically where customers are lingering. And that might indicate either that the copy is not clear, or there's not like a call to action on that section or on that page. And so that could be really helpful too, like that, taking a sort of observational approach. The third could be actually talking through it with them. So as they're going through that customer journey, having a conversation and sort of trying to understand what they do or don't appreciate about it real time. And then finally, it could be more of a sort of focus group style, where you bring a bunch of customers together. They've already been through the process, and you're sort of, getting insights from them. And the focus group style can be really helpful too, to be honest, because sometimes I think what happens is, when you have a group of people in the room and they're kind of speaking to each other, then it kind of triggers memories, or it triggers like someone else saying something. So it can be quite a rich like format. I think, and also, to be honest, like when you're really early stage, like you don't have to spend like a ton of like money or, sort of resources on this. I think if you were able to either offer a voucher, or even like, to have a bunch of, friends or family like do this for you, that could be really insightful. But yeah, doing some of this like sort of, information gathering can be, and taking like different approaches to gathering both data as well as qualitative information can really help to give you some new insights. And it's certainly both an art and a science. I think you do have to combine like intuition with like what you're seeing and hearing. But yeah, hopefully some of that is helpful.
Yeah. I want to touch on to what you mentioned about having different team members allocated to managing different parts of the customer journey. And then you probably have maybe your CTO or your technical co-founder sitting over here. So how do you make sure that everyone doesn't become too siloed, and kind of one person who's prioritizing something at the start of the customer journey doesn't end up taking shortcuts that impact someone further down the line? So how do you create the team that is really like customer centric and has a proper overview of what that journey looks like?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think, the simple answer is really about like communication. And I think there's a few different ways to do it. I think what I found to be really, really helpful is to have uh, both like both quantitative and qualitative checkpoints. So one example is, when it comes to quantitative updates, just making sure that whether it's weekly or monthly, like depending on the, requirements of the stage that you're at, you're bringing people together and you're really looking at data that's impacting the business, everything from, your, a lot of the metrics that we spoke about earlier on around customer engagement and drop-off points, and just all of your different metrics around customers, but then also around business, like how you're spending your money and where that's going and things like that. But then I think it's also really important, and the ways that we've done it at Deliveroo, which may or may not like be kind of necessary at a very early stage, but I'll share it in case it's helpful, is ensuring that we started are, well, firstly, that all of these meetings centered around a document. It was often a Word document rather than a PowerPoint, so that people aren't spending excessive amounts of time like formatting and things like that. Secondly, that you're starting with data, so that you have tables of data. And thirdly, that you're then writing like sort of full sentences to explain the data and or to sort of speak about what's coming up next. I think, depending again on the stage of the company and the like strengths and weaknesses of the team, this could be like really, really helpful, because I think A, it keeps the meetings really, really focused, and B, I think, there's I know like different people have different kind of feelings about PowerPoint decks versus different formats, but I have found that having to explain something in full sentences makes a big difference. It really means that you have to think through, oh, actually, yeah, why is it that like the customer retention like kind of looks very different from 1 month to the next. And so yeah, just making sure that we're really keeping an eye on trends, and like trends of whether it's this week versus past week, this week versus past month, this time of year versus a previous time of year, depending on your type of business. If you're like an occasion based product or service, that tends to have peaks around Christmas or things, Black Friday or Mother's Day, then you want to make sure that all of the signs leading up to these large sort of milestones for the business are looking really positive as well. I think then the second thing is qualitative discussions. Not that there's not qualitative discussions around numbers, but another thing that I used to do on my teams, because I led a very sort of cross-functional teams that didn't overlap a lot in terms of content, was bringing everyone together sort of once a week. And I guess two things. One is to me, it was super important to build the right culture on the team. So we would kick off the like broader team meetings with a 2-word check-in. So it was basically just a really quick thing where we would go around the room and everyone would just share 2 words about how they're feeling. And so I found that this was a really good way to break the ice, and over time you really build trust and just like cohesion on a team that otherwise might not work very closely together or like interact very much. And it also, as a manager, meant that I was able to dig in. If anyone said something about being overwhelmed or struggling with something, I could then follow up with them separately. And then it was basically just like really quick updates of people sharing something significant that happened in their area that the other teams might need to know. So the nice thing was that it was a quick touch point. It wasn't taking up a lot of time from people, but it then meant that if someone mentioned something, we could say, oh yeah, you should speak to this person about it because they're also like looking into something like that. So it was a bit more informal, but it meant that rather than waiting for like a monthly or a quarterly kind of checkpoint, it allows us to have these like conversations and triggers those conversations.
That partially just answered my next question too, which is going to be, now that you've led like 2 large teams, what have you learned about the difference between like a super effective team and a team that is, not cohesive and working together?
It's such a great question, and I do feel like it's incredibly important and really can make a huge difference in how effective or successful a business is. And to me, I think there's a couple of things. One is, I think as a leader, I always came to my teams with a great deal of humility, because I think particularly as you're growing the business and as you're moving into more and more senior roles, you're moving further and further away from the really like nitty gritty like details. And so I think I always made sure that I had a lot of humility about recognizing that, like a really young person on the team or someone really new who's working on something every day, like all day, is probably going to know a lot that I don't know about like that specific area or issues that our customers are facing or that we need to solve. The second thing was that I find to be incredibly important is building psychological safety on the team. And what I mean by this is, I feel like everyone's heard this phrase, but what I mean by this is just ensuring that people can, voice their ideas, concerns without sort of fear or without like basically with candor. And so I think again allowing for autonomy and ownership regardless of like seniority or like tenure in the business, or it doesn't matter if they've been there for a week. I think sometimes in fact someone new asking a bunch of questions can be really helpful for us to sort of rethink something or answer some really important things ourselves. So really building that psychological safety so that anyone can ask a question, anyone is, or other, team members are encouraged to like share thoughts and ideas. And the third thing, I mean, I feel like we could talk about this for days, but I'll try to be really succinct. The third thing I think in this space is, which can be just game changing, is building intrinsic motivation. And what I mean by that is, I think in any business and in any startup, in any business, it's really easy to sort of delegate tasks and be like, okay, like, or, roles and responsibilities, and be really clear about saying, okay, like, this is, this is your remit, this is what we'd like you to do, this is your kind of purpose, or this is your sort of objective. But I think really defining a purpose that underlies that and connecting that to the impact that it has, whether it's on the customer and the community, on something bigger than just making money, can really be game changing in how people approach their work, like how much pride they feel and how they feel a sense of belonging. And and that's just really, really powerful. And just to sort of call out the elephant in the room, I think it might be hard for you to imagine what that might have been at Deliveroo, because it seems like a pretty basically like we deliver food. It doesn't seem particularly purpose driven, but for me, like what really was compelling to me about the role when I joined the team, and what I made sure to communicate to our to my teams, was that at Deliveroo, where it's a three-sided marketplace, each of those stakeholders was a customer. So the restaurants, the riders, and the customers. And to me, what was incredibly meaningful was being able to give a voice to the riders and to create a good place to work for them. And so a lot of our work was centered around, how do we provide like the right tools and resources, and how can we help them succeed, because that then helps like the whole flywheel succeed, and it helps the rest of the business succeed. And so my team and I would go out on rides, we would jump on bicycles and do orders and deliveries together. We would spend time in focus groups, like listening in on riders. We volunteered with like a group called Felix Project, which prepares meals for sort of struggling families and charities. And so just making sure that we're really connecting to a purpose that is, sort of bigger and more meaningful than just getting a specific task done.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think especially like for really early stage startups, and if you're a founder, like your company's your baby, and so you really want to know your early employees. I mean, no one's going to care about the company as much as you, but you want to see that what people are doing, that they care about it and they put heart into it. Founders, we're going to move to questions really shortly, so please raise your hand if you want to ask a question live or put it in the chat. I'm curious to know, before we move on to the final questions about angel investing and what you look for, last question on customer ops. What are big time wasters that you've seen founders kind of fall victim to, especially if you're measuring so many different areas of the business? How do you make sure that you don't get distracted in the wrong place?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question. And to be honest, I think one of the most difficult things is really that there's just so much possibility and so much that you can be doing and so many things that you could be pursuing. And so I think that the biggest thing here is really being quite disciplined about saying, okay, like this quarter or this half of the year, this is what we're going to focus on. This is our big bet. This is the, kind of whether it's a product or service or a direction or like a strategy, what have you. I think being really, really, really disciplined, because I think uh, if the founders and if the leaders are not like really, really, really disciplined on that, I think it can very quickly mean that everybody's doing too much all at the same time, and then nothing is to a high quality. And I think you can just burn out your team very quickly that way as well. So, and I know, you know, it's much easier said than done. I think there's always a lot of pressure from investors and, you know, of course, like just from yourself, because you want to grow the business and you want to try different things. But I think like being really, really disciplined about, okay, for this period of time, this is the thing that we're going to be like really focused on. And then if you do decide at a later stage to change directions or to pivot, just articulating that and making sure that that's communicated well so that people understand and feel like they're being brought along the journey as opposed to sort of just switching. One of the things I've seen that can be not very productive is where, you know, we try something on a team and then or rather in a business, and then we're like, oh, actually, like, no, that didn't work, and we're going to pivot. But then rather than actually articulating and explaining why we're pivoting, I think if we kind of make it seem like a failure, that can be that can have a really big impact on motivation, not just for this upcoming project, but I think just like in general. I think people feel like, oh, like we just, you know, don't know what we're doing. And so I think it's very natural to have to pivot. And I think it's very natural to kind of want to do multiple things. But I think, you know, being really, really disciplined. And, you know, I think the other thing can be really just capturing, whether that's in a document or in a discussion, like that, you know, these are the things that are going to be really important short term. And then like midterm and longer term, there can be like other things on the horizon that we're going to zoom out or like move towards doing as well.
Great. So last thing to touch on is angel investing. So talk to us about some of the investments you've done, what your focus is, and you know what you look for particularly in a pitch and in a founder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, I think it's really, really tough to sort of and I think zoom in or you know, basically like to have to say no to lots of ideas because there are just so many compelling ideas. But I think the things that really stand out are firstly like founders that know the problem really intimately. I think sometimes, you know, as an investor, I feel like I've met founders who will share an idea, but it's not really clear what the connection between them and this problem space is. Like, so I think just, you know, being quite candid about what that story is, what your experience with that problem space is, can be really compelling. The second thing is, of course, like when you're really early, you know, when you're at a sort of pre-seed early stage, like there's not a ton of data about the business or about like the idea specifically yet, or like operationally yet. And so I think being able to demonstrate some like quantitative like skill set by showing that you've done your due diligence on the industry, on, you know, competitors in the space, business models and things like that can be very compelling. And I think, you know, we should also like just be quite candid about the fact that the world that we're operating in today is quite different from like 2 or 3 years ago. I think, you know, for a lot of tech startups, like it was a little bit easier a few years ago to get away with saying, oh yeah, first we're just going to acquire customers or acquire, you know, eyeballs, and then we'll figure out how to monetize this later. I think today there's much, much more pressure to be really quite savvy about, you know, speaking with clarity about the business model and revenue like streams. And so maybe that's my second point. I think the third thing is really about the founding team. If you're like not a solo founder, you know, being very good at explaining what each of these different people bring to the team, and how well rounded out that team is. And one thing that I really look out for when I'm like watching a pitch is how the founding team interacts with each other. If they're interrupting each other, talking over each other, or if there's really a strong sort of dynamic there, that can be really, really telling. Yeah, I feel like, and then, at the end of the day, I think it's also really important not to take anyone that's either not interested or not able to invest at this moment. I would just say like not to take it personally, because sometimes, there's just things that are completely outside of your control. It has nothing to do with like the business idea. It has nothing to do with the founding team. And they could still be a really good resource, like either later down the road, or in terms of like introductions and advisory and things like that. So I guess in terms of my own interest areas, I tend to focus on consumer goods and e-commerce. So I've both invested in and been an advisor to an ethical leather goods startup for many years, based out of San Francisco, and a couple of e-commerce businesses. But I'm also doing a bunch of advisory work with other founders. So yeah, that's hopefully helpful.
We will, we had a good question from Heather. I just want to ask one final question and then we'll take Heather's question. Because we've had a lot of investors in so far who focus on the B2B SaaS startups, but we do have a fair amount of e-commerce and B2C companies here as well. And so for those who are with us today, what are the sort of, what does good look like for a pre-seed consumer-facing good startup? That could be actually in terms of like revenue or customer acquisition, retention. Like what would make you say, wow, at a pre-seed?
Oh, it's such a good question, but such a tough question, I think, because so much goes into evaluating fit. But I think to the point around, I think if what to me is really compelling is if someone really knows that they're like their target consumers, they really know the space, they understand what competitors are bringing to the table, what their unique, sort of selling point is, what they're doing differently, how they plan to reach their target segments. I think like having a lot of like clarity and data in that space makes for a really compelling like story. I don't think it's like a specific number. It's not like, oh, they're going to hit like 1 million in the first X period of time. No, I think it's more about, do they seem like they've really done their, legwork? Have they really done the research? Do they know this space really well? And do they come across as having a lot of like insight and a lot of passion for solving this problem?
Okay, first question from Heather. Heather, if you're able to, I might ask you to come on and add a bit more context to the question. It says, what do you think about someone coming back to you after you've said no? So Heather, I'd love to hear, like, is this about an angel investor that you turned down, or is it a customer?
Yeah, an angel investor. So if you've come with like a pitch and you come back a few months later saying we've either revisited our business model or we've added a bit more clarity around, how we're positioning ourselves or our offer or whatever. How do you feel about that? Or, is it just annoying?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Heather. I think firstly, I think anytime you're having a conversation with someone, it's definitely helpful to ask that question if they wouldn't mind if you reached out in a few months, or at a later date. If you haven't already done that, I do think it's worth just asking the question and being quite direct and being like, oh, actually, like we've tweaked a few things, like just wanted to check if you'd be open to a chat and hearing more about like where we are today. And they might say yes or no, but I think it's worth just being quite direct and asking. And no, I don't think it's annoying at all. I think I think well, I guess, I mean, different individuals might have different takes on this, but I think you appreciate that there's just a lot going on, like as you're growing the business. So, you know, where you are in 3 months or 6 months might be really different from where you were during the last conversation.
And I also saw Mark commented earlier when you mentioned the bit of software that tracks where the mouse is. He mentioned Hotjar. So that could be a good option. I'd love to hear too if any founders want to come on and talk about any problems that they're currently facing in their customer ops journey around retention, or I guess like any part of that process too. We could chat through any of those challenges. But Purdy had a question, so I'll call any Purdy.
Do you want to raise your hand if you've got a question for Chai, or if you want to talk through a particular challenge that you've got, just so we can manage how much time we have? I was just going to ask what's next for you, because I think you left Deliveroo at the beginning of the year, or like earlier this year. What are you doing now?
Yeah, I've been quite intentional about taking a sabbatical and doing some travel. But I will go back to a like leadership role at some point, probably next year. But yeah, it's been really important to me to take some time off and really spend some time on the angel investing and advisory work, but also on doing some public speaking. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is building strong culture and high performance teams. So it's something that I've been working on quite a bit, both in terms of materials and in terms of speaking engagements.
What do you do in situations where you have a marketplace or even a three-sided marketplace, and like one decision to improve the customer journey would impact the delivery people, and like how do you balance that trade-off?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, and it does often come up in three-sided businesses, because yeah, it's not always clear that, you know, sort of any one decision is going to benefit all three sides of the marketplace. One example, you know, I can give you from Deliveroo, for example, is on a or actually two examples, is that on a rainy day, like those are the days.
Oh, someone just took themselves off mute. Please make sure you stay on mute. Okay.
On a rainy day, like those are the days when customers are most likely to be ordering. So your customer orders are going to be really, really high, but those are also the days when your riders are likely to be, are less likely to want to be out on the roads. And so, you know, I think these situations do often crop up. And, you know, I think another sort of example from the Deliveroo context is having really low customer wait times means that you want to have a really good sized fleet so that nobody has to wait more than, you know, X minutes. But then what you then have to balance that with is that if you have too large a fleet, then your riders have really long wait times for orders. And so that can be really painful and just like not productive for riders. And so, yeah, it is a matter of like, you know, sort of quantitatively trying to strike that balance, like through like lots of modeling. But I think it's also about sort of recognizing that we can't, yeah, that you're not going to solve for everybody's sort of requirements at all times. So, you know, trying to figure out in the long run what's going to create the most positive, like virtuous cycle for the business, and what the sort of acceptable, you know, it might not be perfect for every stakeholder, but what's like good enough, so that you're keeping the sort of interactions positive for everyone, or the experience positive for everyone.
That makes sense. We have founders in each week of the program update us on how many users they've spoken with this week, and like what sort of feedback they got and what they plan to do with the feedback. And sometimes we hear founders who are like just a little concerned to speak to users because they don't want to seem annoying, and also if they want to give the impression of or that they're not like in scrappy startup mode. They're a bit worried that if they speak as the founder, it's going to look like people are going to realize, okay, this is like a 3-person company. And is that a valid concern for founders, or is it normal that users and customers are used to being reached out to, and that is like not a fear that they should have?
Yeah, I don't think that's unreasonable at all, to be honest, because I think, customers might have very different perspectives on this. So again, I think I would just lead with a question. And to be honest, I think just to challenge the stereotype that customers might be put off by the fact that it might be a 3-person team, they might actually be really impressed and then be even more inclined to recommend your business to sort of friends and family. So yeah, I would sort of lead with a question and ask if they'd be willing to help and to engage. And sometimes we offer like what I've done in the past is offer some sort of small token of appreciation. Whether it's like a voucher for something or yeah, I think there will certainly be customers who are annoyed by it, and there will be customers who are happy to engage and support and help. And you could always, provide a voucher for a future like product or service, so they become a recurring customer.
I just got a DM from a founder, and I'll ask this question anonymously. Oh, Danny, I just saw you raise your hand. I'll call on you in just a second. For a founder who's like who's building a B2C company, how important is brand at pre-seed? And so they're wondering like whether or not they should invest in bringing on a graphic designer and like a professional design team if they're a consumer good, even if they're super early and they haven't raised loads of money. Like, what's the expectation there?
Yeah, to be honest, as an investor, that wouldn't seem like the best use of resources to me. So, but this also depends on how, like, what skill sets you have on your founding team. So if you're able to kind of muddle through it, if you could use like platforms like Fiverr and, like kind of get away with something that's not perfect or not like super polished, but can get you through the first X months or, first year or a couple of years, I would definitely lean towards being leaner on that front. But like spending a lot of time on like clarity. So being really, really clear, like with what the product is, what the service is, and the copy on your page, so that anytime a customer is landing, like it's super clear, like what you're doing. So I think it's less, I feel like the branding isn't, it will always, there's always room for branding to improve, like no matter what size of company you are. And so I think if you can get away with doing a best effort to start with and just like, trying to gain traction with customers, and focusing resources on that, and really, kind of iterating on the product or the service, I think you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck, than investing a lot on branding upfront.
Great. Okay, Danny.
Hello, good morning. Thank you. So my name's Danny, and I'm the founder of IDGO, which is the UK's first double-sided proof of age, identity, and contactless prepaid card. I created IDGO because I saw a huge number of users aged 18 years and over who are carrying valuable documents such as passports and driving licenses to prove their age and identity for everyday purposes and age-restricted purchases. My question for you, please, well, some advice actually, is more of some advice. So I am a licensed provider, pass card provider, so I can start issuing cards. And when I created IDGO, I created the application journey to be streamlined completely on the app. So you would verify yourself and go through the whole journey via the app, and you'd make payment at the end of it. And I've got like the software verification company, secured and things like that. And obviously building the tech, that's the fund part of the funding and the reason why I'm raising investment. Now, I'm not the first pass card issuer. I'm the first double-sided one, but not the first pass card issuer. They actually had a manual journey where it was a paper application. People may have seen like pamphlets and things like that where people would apply and post their photographs in. So you'd have like an offline journey, whereas I created it, it would just be online. Now, because I actually came up with the idea in 2017, there has been a lot of obviously building the operations manual. I needed to be licensed, and there's been a lot of growth. So, you know, is good there. But now part of the thing is about getting cards in pockets. And I've also decided to do a basic version of the card as well, because I met up with my ID consultant the other day, and he asked me why I hadn't issued myself a card yet, my own IDGO card. And I said, this is going to sound so silly, but I said, Tony, can I do that? And he said, yeah, of course you can. He said, you know, you can verify yourself. I could actually launch the manual version from our offices. But then you know, it's like, I could, what I'm thinking about doing is maybe setting up a booking system where people then come in and then they, you know, like when you go and get a passport on the same day, and just booking it in and allowing people to make payment and having that kind of journey just to start off with. Like it could just be, you know, not just friends and family, but, you know, just getting the cards out there, MVP, right? But it has no USP. The journey itself was meant to be the USP. The double-sided card itself was the USP. If I bring it all the way back to what I originally innovated it to, I just don't, you know, it's possible, but then you still need certain, you know, I've thought about the journey, the whole customer journey, and felt like, you know, I don't want to have all of these because I'm going to have to keep data. And then you'd rather you keep the data online than, you know, offline. And so I guess I'm kind of struggling whether I should just keep my eyes on the prize, go for the funding that I need, and get the USP product and service that I'm going for, or if just to get the MVP out there, which is what investors have said to me previously, you know, can't you just launch a few cards, which I can't because MasterCard, because
Hey, Danny, sorry, I'm just going to jump in. If we could summarize the question in like 1 or 2 sentences, I want to make sure.
My apologies. Sorry, it was exactly
Okay,
that. Should I keep my eyes on the prize, or should I launch a really outdated version of what it is that I created? Sorry for the journey. Yeah.
No, not at all. Thanks, Danny, for sharing. I have to confess, I feel like I need to understand a little bit more about the space to, you know, to give a an informed answer to the question. But maybe I'm happy to pick up maybe after this call to just dive into it in a bit more detail. But maybe just to kind of touch on the theme of the question. It sounds like you're struggling with, you know, what you see as the, you know, the product and the objective of your and the mission of your business versus maybe you know, ideas that other people are sharing with you and investors in particular, and that can be a really tough spot to be in. I think, you know, it is a bit of assessing like who are the target customers and what are the use cases for these target customers, and what's going to gain me more traction. Is it the thing that I had in mind where, you know, do I stay true to that, and is that going to get me like a faster adoption rate or like faster rate of growth, or is it going to be you know, this other sort of tangential thing, but then what is the opportunity cost to that? So I think I would try and articulate like, who are the target customers, what is the like kind of knock-on effects of either of these like decisions, and then yeah, what is the opportunity cost of either? I hope that's helpful.
No, that is actually, yeah, no, absolutely. I can definitely work that out, because I was thinking, you know, how long would an application take? It could maybe take an hour. I'm going to be charging £14.99 for the basic card. Is it going to be worth £15 per hour? Do you know what I mean? You know, but then it gets the cards out
Sorry,
there.
I'm gonna jump in.
Sorry,
We're
thank
gonna
you.
move to the next
Thank
question. So, sorry, Danny. Thanks.
That's okay.
Okay, gonna take a question from the chat, and then Darren, we'll go to you. Lauren's asked for a consumer investment opportunity. How many years into the future do you like to see financial projections? 3 years, 5 years? What's your preference?
Yeah, I definitely like to see like a short, medium, and long term, and 5 years feels perfectly reasonable for a long term horizon. I think anything further than that is, I think we'd all be kidding ourselves to think we know what it could look like. But I think also just ensuring that you're basing that on, either competitors or some other information from the industry or from um, from the problem space would be really helpful.
Okay, Darren and Noel, we're going to try to get yours to yours too in the next like minute. So rapid fire round.
Thanks, Margaret, and thanks, Purdy. Brilliant as always. Hi, Chai. My question would be, most of us here in the group, I think, are kind of pre-seed or moving towards seed. With your operational experience and background, and with limited budget in mind, what would be your top 3 ops hires if we've got limited experience within a startup environment, and in order of preference?
And so thanks for the question, Darren. Such a good question. And you mentioned you're a B2B business, or?
We're actually B2B and B2C. We have
Okay.
3 pillars.
Okay. I think, my answer to this would be twofold. I think first, it would be really helpful to assess who you already have on the team and what sort of like skills or experiences you'd like to bring on board. And so I think if you feel like actually there's not really anyone on the team who's done, maybe you have either yourself, you have the experience, or there's other people around you who've done like the strategy side, but you've not actually had people who are executing and sort of hands-on and running things, then you might want to bring in someone a little bit more senior who's done that, and then can take that off your plate of deciding, oh, actually, okay, in this, like at this stage and at this size and at this phase, like what we need is XYZ. And that can actually just alleviate a lot of A, decision making, and B, like just activity from your to-do list. But I think and I think rather the sort of flip side to this is, if you already have some of that expertise either in your background or around you, then, and you just need like, it's more a thing where you have like things that need to be executed, what needs to be done, and you need people to execute, then it might make more sense to bring in slightly more junior people who can then grow with you and grow with the business, and it will be more cost efficient, or like a good allocation of resources. So it's a bit of assessing like what do I already know, or what are my strengths already, and what do I need to bring on board that would make this like much less painful for me. The second part though is, I think what's like really crucial, because I think a lot of us, we think, okay, I need someone who and regardless of size of company, I think we all make this mistake, which is thinking, oh, I need someone who really knows this industry or really knows this role. And I think what I found through having both hired and unfortunately having had to fire people is like attitude is so much more important than like specific experience. Because I think what sometimes happens is people join your team having done something very similar somewhere else, and they think they can just copy and paste exactly what they've done. And sometimes that works, but I think what you really want is someone who can come in and be just like proactive, and like who can like be creative, and who can be agile, and who, like just these sort of character traits that will help them both solve the specific issues that you're trying to solve for, but then be also like can then help them grow with your business, and grow your business.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Super helpful.
We are out of time, so Noel, I'm sorry, we're going to have to hold off on your question. But Chai, thank you so much for joining us. What's the best way for people to find you afterwards? Is that LinkedIn?
Yeah, please. I'm so sorry that we've run out of time. And yes, please do feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to, to help if I can. Yeah, it's so exciting and so encouraging to see so many founders, and yeah, I'm really optimistic about I think the business world, when I meet like really energized and inspiring founders, like I'm sure many of you are.
They're all wonderful. Thank you so much. We will let you go. We'll wave goodbye to you, and we have Jeremy, our next speaker here. And we'll stop recording too. Shetty, if you want to hit
Brilliant.
record.
Thanks, everyone.
Shai.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.